So are you looking for a character that can do just about anything? But when push comes to shove, they'll just blow things up or burn them down. Well, you're in luck. Because behind today's secret door, the Artificer Artillerist test drive. So behind today's secret door, the Artificer Artillerist test drive. This is Secret Door, a channel devoted to in-depth discussions about Dungeons and Dragons, and my name is Matt Morich. Well, before I get started, let me just point out I have started a Patreon. If you would be interested in supporting the channel, it would be much appreciated. The link will be in the description and in the pinned comment. And in regards to the pinned comment, always check that whenever you're seeing a test drive of mine for any corrections, if I made a mistake or if there was an omission or maybe just an additional note, something I didn't get to in the test drive that I meant to say. And in this particular one, I'm a little sleep deprived, so it's possible that you might have to check there more than I would like on this one, but I hope not. Let's hope not. So a test drive is exactly what it sounds like. It's your ability to see what a character will play level by level. In this test drive, I'm going to take you from level 1 through 15, and you'll be able to see how this class stacks up to other classes, because it's a big commitment to start a new character, and you shouldn't have to make that commitment based solely on what your own impressions are based on what you read in the class or what you're getting from a guide or even a build online. This is a chance to see how it'll hold up in practical play, how it's buildish and it's kind of guide-ish, but it's really your chance to see how it'll feel, how it will play. So let me just give a quick overview of my impressions on the Artificer. It'll also help as a sort of summary of what we're going to see coming forward here. So the Artificer to me is a very difficult class to wrap your arms around because it's just always a little bit different than what you would expect from other classes. So for example, the Artificer is a half-caster, but of course it's different than all the other half-casters. You're able to round down when figuring the caster level, so it plays different than other half-casters. It's a little bit better than other half-casters, just a little bit. And when you first sit down, this was my feeling anyway, when I first looked at the Artificer back when it came out in Eberron, I was like, it looks fine. It looked like a class that would get pretty darn good by level 9. And that still kind of holds true. I think probably level 7 is where it'll really begin to cement. But it doesn't have that takeoff point where you just go, wow, I really want to get right away in playing this. Everything that you're looking forward to is level 7 forward. And there's nothing for you here now. I shouldn't say nothing, but not quite enough when just looking at it alone to say, I want to play this. Well, I think that as we go forward here, you'll see that I've come up with a bit of a solution to that problem, because it also has another problem with the Artificer, and that is it suffers more than maybe any other class by not having its class specialization. If you're playing an Artificer character and you're not level 3 yet, you're not even really playing remotely the same character. Level 1 and 2 don't play the same as 3 forward do. And that can be true of some classes, but not any is quite as profound as the Artificer. The Artificer is a ritual caster, which is something you wouldn't expect from a half-caster. So in that respect, they're a little bit better. They prepare their spells as if they were a divine caster. So even though they're an intelligence-based character, so they don't have the wizard's problem of having to prep spells based on the spells that they have available to them in their spell book. They get the advantage of being able to pick whatever they want from the entire spell list on any given day. But they still, of course, have preparations like a wizard, a cleric, a druid, etc. But they get that kind of divine casting feature, yet they're an arcane class. So that too is a little bit better. But it depends better on what? Based on what? What are we comparing the Artificer to? And that's the real question. I mean, clearly it's a martial class. And it's a half caster. So it would be a big mistake to compare it to something like a wizard or any of the other full casters. But in this particular case, you can actually take a look at the Artificer and say it comes the closest, in some respects, to feeling like a full caster, but being able to grab martial considerations, martial powers in a meaningful way. And that's a very fun character to play. Now, I will be the first to confess, steampunk doesn't do much for me. So the Artificer, in terms of what the whole shtick is with the character, doesn't do a whole lot for me. I like the mechanics in the class quite a bit. So from a role-playing standpoint, all I'm really going to talk about from a role-play standpoint is really here. And that is, if you like the mechanics, but you're like me and steampunk doesn't scream out to you. To me, I'm so old school that steampunk doesn't feel like it belongs in D&D. I'm not saying it doesn't, but I'm just really old school. And it's a newer idea. And it doesn't quite fit for me. So if you're of that kind of a mindset, then do your best to just focus on the magic of the class and not so much the idea that it's technology or nascent technology or whatever, however the Artificer is defined. Conversely, you could spin it completely the other way. If that steampunk idea really inspires you, then you could really be thinking about this, because it is an intelligence-based class, and it is in a magical world, that this is how technology, coming from genius, takes form in a magical world, that magic almost naturally inhabits a feat of technological genius. And so you could look at it from that perspective. So that's really all I can say about the role-playing. And normally I have a lot more to say about role-playing in a class, but maybe it's just my own, I don't really care about steampunk kind of an attitude, or that I just don't have a lot of experience reading that kind of fiction and what have you, that I don't feel, other than what I've just said, I don't feel like I've got a whole lot to say on that. But getting back to the mechanical overview of the class, so it also is kind of like a warlock. The infusions, as we will see, are very, very reminiscent of a warlock's invocations. But again, of course, they're different. And it's a bit different than the warlock invocations in that you can change out your infused items on any given day. You have limits, but you can change them out, swap them in and out. So imagine you had a pool of invocations and you got to pick which invocations you were going to use for that day. That's essentially how the Artificer plays. Very flexible. But until you see it that way, it doesn't seem like all that big of a whoop. But the idea that you are able to take your infusions and treat them as if a wizard were preparing spells for the day, it changes how you view what the worthiness of taking a particular infusion is. I am not going to get terribly in depth on that topic as we do the test drive, because the extra part of that, the extra infusions, I would view as really utility abilities that would be useful to have. So if you know you're going into this kind of situation, you might prepare an infused item for that situation. But because campaigns are all so very different and DMs are very different and all that, it's the value of utility type infusions is a bit harder. So the infusions I'm going to be recommending and talking about are going to be the ones you want for general adventuring. And of course, then there's the other idea with the infused items. Imagine you had a Warlock invocation, but you could hand it off to somebody else and say, here, you have this ability. The Artificer can do that. So it's a very, very flexible character. As you're going to see, this character does very good damage to outright great damage. And it does it pretty quick. In addition, it's got the ability to exert control while still doing damage. In the turn that it's casting a control spell, it could do in that round, in the same round, it can be doing just below average damage. And a wizard can't even dream of doing that. A wizard can't even dream of doing just below average, and I'm talking general wizards here, just below average damage on rounds that they aren't casting a spell, meaning casting their control spell. That's what they're casting. The Artificer, the Artillerist, can do that and do just below average damage in addition to that per round. Very flexible, very powerful. So this particular class is one that it's got a lot of little moving parts that when you put them all together, and I guess it's very fitting for the class, that when you put all those little moving parts together, what you have is actually pretty darn powerful. And we're going to find out right now. So for the starting race, we're going to go with custom lineage, and we're going to buy a 15 intelligence, we're going to buy a 14 in con and in dex, and we're going to buy a 12 wisdom, and we're going to dump charisma, and we're going to dump strength. In Adventurers League play, any character that doesn't have a background feat, and that's something that is, your campaign may or may not have those, but in AL play, you can pick between skilled, tough, or magic initiate. And in this case, we're going to take magic initiate, and it's going to be great that that's available to us. For the feat, for the custom lineage, we're going to take Fey Touched. We're going to obviously put that +1 into intelligence to a 16, take the +2, put that into intelligence to an 18 at level 1, which is very, very strong. The real reason I'm taking Fey Touched is for the starting spell. We're going to take Sleep. Now, this class, as I said earlier, suffers greatly at levels 1 and 2. You can get by. I'm not saying it's an unplayable class from levels 1 to 2, but it's really not attractive. There's really no... levels 1 and 2, if you're playing without what I'm doing here with Sleep, it's going to be much more miserable than if you had Sleep. With Sleep, you're going to be playing at levels 1 and 2 as if essentially you were a wizard with armor. Now that's something to play. At level 3, we're going to, of course, get Misty Step from Fey Touched, and that bonus action is going to be a real problem for the Artillerist, whose bonus actions are pretty much all accounted for. So this will be, in combat, a very much in case of emergency break glass kind of spell, or it could simply be used in a utility fashion outside of combat. Getting back to the background feat with Magic Initiate, we're going to take Find Familiar, and that's another great asset for this character, as we will see. And the other big asset for it is, of course, we get 2 cantrips, and in this case from the wizard list. And this is a big deal because the Artificer only starts with 2 cantrips, and it's virtually forced to take Mending. You cannot take Mending, but I wouldn't recommend it. So for the 4 starting cantrips that we'll be taking, we're going to have Mending, Mage Hand, Thorn Whip, and Firebolt. Mage Hand is not essential to this build. It's just a very, very strong one. Minor Illusion is very, very strong, but if there was something else that you wanted from the Artificer cantrip list is extensive, actually. And or if you wanted to go to the Wizard one, you should be able to mix and match. Thorn Whip is the only strictly Artificer one that's on the list so far. So some other things to note. We get proficiency with, this is, of course, all Artificers get proficiency with medium armor and with shields. We're not worried about weapons because this character isn't really going to be using weapons. We also get proficiency in Thieves' Tools. That's very, very useful in a pinch. If you don't have a rogue in the party, at least you'll have the Artificer who can at least open a door or a chest or disarm a trap or have a shot at it anyway. And of course, we get proficiency in the con saving throw, and that's a great deal. Now, the problem here is that we're not going to have concentration spells really to worry about until level 5. This character doesn't have an enormous draw of concentration spells, but we're going to get a meat and potatoes one at level 5 that we'll be using from level 5 to the end of your career. So you'll definitely want to maintain concentration as long as humanly possible. So having that con save is great. And of course, we get spell casting. So we are going to get 2 spell slots here at first level. And because we are a unique kind of half caster, our caster level is 1. When we're level 3, we'll be a second level caster. When we're level 5, we'll be a third level caster, level 7, 4th level, etc., etc., etc. So in terms of actual play, what's going to happen here at first level is you've got 2 spell slots and you have a free casting of Sleep from Fey Touched. So you're going to use all of them for Sleep. Sleep is here to get you to level 5. We're going to add to the value of Sleep at level 2. And at level 3, Sleep is going to become even more effective. And it should be enough to get us to level, by the time we hit level 5, where the character begins to take off, will have been powerful enough that we'll have felt effective. You'll feel that you're contributing greatly to the success of the party. Sleep generally tails off. It depends on the campaign and the DM, the kinds of encounters they're throwing at you, but level 3, 4, and 5 are where it all becomes diet. Level 1 and 2 is dominant. Level 3, it's still effective, but not always effective. Level 4, it becomes really dicey. And generally speaking, normally casting Sleep in the traditional way under normal circumstances, by level 5, forget about it. It's pretty much pointless. As using it in the traditional way, I will outline how we will use it. But at level 1, you're just going to use it in the standard way. And that's all you'll need it for. Your average damage per round using Firebolt will be 5.5 because you are hitting slightly above the curve. Your hitting percentage is a little bit better. And I'm assuming that because you have Find Familiar, and I'm assuming this for the test drive forward, your damage is always going to be predicated on using Firebolt for your damage with the help action from the Familiar. And it'll be hitting ahead of the curve, and then the infusions will take some part in that, but we don't have infusions just yet. So 5.5 is fine. It's not great, but it's not horrible. And of course, your big ticket you're punching here is with Sleep. So level 2, we get magical infusions, and now the fun really starts. You get 4 known infusions, and you can infuse 2 items. So the infusions that are critical to take at this point, and there will be 1 left over for you to look at for utility, will be Enhanced Defense, and in this case, you'll want it for your armor, the Enhanced Arcane Focus, and the Homunculus Servant. Now, I love the Homunculus Servant, and it's kind of cool that you're going to have a Homunculus Servant and your owl, but don't get too attached to the Homunculus Servant because it's going to get traded out at the very next level. The Homunculus Servant has it functions very similarly to a Familiar, except, and there are many other exceptions, the critical ones here for this test drive are that you can, by taking a bonus action, you can grant it the ability to attack. It moves after you, and its attack does a d4 in damage plus your proficiency bonus in damage. That's all we're really worried about with the homunculus. Now, what the homunculus will be doing for you, it goes after you in combat always. So when you're ready to cast sleep, if it looks a little bit dicey, or if you might just want to do this as a standard method of operation here at level 2, just simply take the ready action instead of the cast action to cast sleep and put it after your homunculus attacks. Now, if you've got the help action from the owl, the homunculus will almost certainly hit. And if it does, it'll be doing 4.5 points of damage on average. Then you're casting sleep. That 4.5 points of damage is now reduced from the total hit points that you're having to cast against with sleep, making sleep more effective. It's not quite as good as an upcast of sleep. It's about half of an upcast of sleep. You could further this tactic by taking the ready action to cast it after a party member goes after your turn. So getting even more hit points of damage out on the enemy before you cast sleep. But in general, I think since you've got your own little backup that's always going after you, it's very convenient. You can always just do this with really nothing lost. The only thing you'll be losing is your reaction, and you couldn't be concentrating on another spell while you're doing this, but in this case, we don't have to worry about that. So the homunculus will be doing that extra, it's like a 90% chance of hitting against the curve for the homunculus at this level. So 4.5 points plus the sleep at level 2, you should be wrecking the encounter. So in terms of armor class, even at level 1, you have an 18 armor class with scale mail and a shield and a 14 dex. Now level 2, with the enhanced defense, you've got a 19 armor class. So you're going to be pretty hard to hit, especially at this level. Your average damage per round, and I'm assuming not casting sleep, is going to be 8.81. And that's assuming, of course, that you're using the help action for your firebolt and not for the homunculus. All right, level 3, we get our specialization, the Artillerist, and we're going to also be a second level caster, so now we have 3 spell slots. That's going to be very important now, because with the Artillerist, we get the Eldritch Cannon. You get to create 1 Eldritch Cannon a day for free. The Eldritch Cannon has 5 times your level in hit points, and it has an AC of 18. It is considered an object and not a creature. It takes your bonus action to activate the cannon, and using that bonus action, if you provide it, you don't have to give the cannon legs, but I wouldn't see why you wouldn't. It can then move, if it has legs, 15 feet with that same bonus action command. But it only lasts an hour. But you can make another one by casting a spell slot. So here's the real rub, and that is you've got 4 potential sleep castings, 1 from Fey Touch, and you've got 3 spell slots. So your castings of sleep are probably now going to go down. You get also 1 free cannon. So assuming that you have 3 encounters in a day, which I think is generally the average, if you have 3 encounters a day, that 1 cannon might get you through 2 encounters, if you're lucky. If you're in a dungeon, I think it's very likely. But it just depends on the campaign. And even that, it just depends on the circumstances that you find yourself in. I'm going to assume, as I quote through all of this, that you are entering a combat with a cannon already made. Before you go into a room of a dungeon, or if you're going into a situation where you feel combat is even remotely likely, you should be, if you don't have a cannon, you should make one. You don't want to be wasting an action in combat making the cannon. So if you had to burn spell slots to make the cannon, ideally, if you had 3 and 1 cannon could get you through 2 encounters, you would only have to burn 1 additional spell slot to get another cannon to get you through the 3rd encounter, leaving you with conveniently 3 sleep spells. I'm going to have to make a lot of assumptions with this character. I do with every character that we do a test drive with. This one really, it gets a little crazy, the assumptions I have to make. I think they're all very reasonable ones. I think that what I just outlined is how it will happen most of the time, but there's certainly going to be times where maybe the cannon gets destroyed, or your time limit had run out before the next encounter, and so you might have to go into another spell slot. If you find that that's the situation, the cannon will provide a lot of offense at level 3. It's probably better to lean towards using the spell slot for the cannon. I can't believe I'm saying this, rather than use sleep, which is so powerful, but we are at level 3. So I think I would rather have the cannon in hand than make a casting of sleep, but that is your call. And you may not even have to make it. Ideally, you'll have 3 castings of sleep and a cannon, hopefully, that will be available to you during every encounter with just 1 spell slot and that other free creation per day. Now, when you make your cannon, you can give it, you have a choice of 1 of 3 options. You can go Flamethrower, Force Ballista, or Protector. The Protector provides temporary hit points. The Force Ballista is a longer range attack that does 2d8 force damage, but to a single target, and that's the rub. The Flamethrower is, of course, the greatest offensive choice you can make. It makes a 15-foot cone that does 2d8, and they get a dex saving throw against your spell DC, and if they make the save, they get half damage. But there are plenty of circumstances where maybe making the Force Ballista or the Protector is the best choice. I'm going to be assuming Flamethrower throughout this, but there's going to be plenty of times where generating the temporary hit points from that Protector is insanely useful. It just depends on your circumstances. If you know you're going into a really tough situation, it might be worth just going into another spell slot to give the entire party those temporary hit points. This is where you really need to look at what the artillerist is getting from this cannon. All it says is a spell slot. You don't get anything more by a higher level spell slot. So for first level spell slots, you're getting a cannon that can do 3 different things, all of them useful. The first one is essentially like getting the Dragon Breath spell. That spell is a concentration spell. You don't have to concentrate on the cannon. Dragon Breath lasts a minute. The cannon lasts an hour. And it takes an action for the recipient of Dragon's Breath to use the Dragon's Breath. Your cannon only requires a bonus action from you. That's insanely valuable. The Protector ability to generate temporary hit points for the entire party for a first level spell, that's crazy broken. So it may very well be that your best bet is to just burn the spell and make another cannon. You can play a lot of roles. You can be a pinch rogue. You can be obviously a heavy damage dealer. You can be a utility caster in a bizarre way. And in a way, you can be a healer, either through the cannon or when we get to level 5 and you get your second level spells. Your first level spells, you're going to have the option of always taking Cure Wounds. So you'll always have that. And I highly recommend preparing Cure Wounds. Now, on the subject of spells, the artillerist also gains, through this specialization, they gain the shield. At this level, they gain the Shield spell and Thunder Wave. I'm not so worried about Thunder Wave, but Shield is fantastic. Your first level spells are going to go like that with this character. You're going to either be making cannons with them. At this level, you're maybe wanting to use sleep with them, because now here's the fun part with sleep. You use the bonus action to activate the cannon, but the cannon is not a creature and doesn't have its own initiative, so it just goes. That 15-foot cone doing 2d8 damage, I'm going to assume throughout this test drive that you are going to be able to hit 2 targets. I think that's pretty reasonable. Certainly there's going to be times where there's only going to be 1, and there's going to be times where there's going to be 3. But I think a lot of the times it's not going to be too terribly difficult to get 2. But this is also where Thorn Whip comes in. If you're worried about getting them in, maximizing the cannon, Thorn Whip has a 10-foot pull. It does a little bit less damage than Firebolt does, but if anyone is within 10 feet of where that cone is, it's worthwhile to Thorn Whip them in, bonus action, burn the cone. So while it's certainly going to be much more feasible for you to corral your way into 3 targets, and there's going to be times, you've got 6 available squares to hit with a 15-foot cone. So you could, theoretically, you could get 6. You'll never see it, I don't think. But I think getting 2 reliably is a very safe assumption, especially with your ability to corral into Thorn Whip. If you are ever in doubt of whether it's worth it because the damage is a little bit less from Thorn Whip to Firebolt, you'll actually do about 3 points more of damage by pulling somebody into the cone's area of effect. And the possibility that then they might just be kind of stuck in that situation, or might just be able to be consecutively targeted in that scenario after that, means you should definitely always, if you have the option to corral somebody into the cone, you definitely want to pull them into the cone. And now here's where the fun is, right? So your damage now is 5.77 base from you. And it's 13.5 from the cannon. Meaning at level 3, your average damage per round is 19.27. Your average damage at this level would be 7.2. You're just shy of being 200% over average damage at level 3. Shockingly, amazingly good damage. Great damage. And when you combine that, now of course if you cast Sleep, you won't be getting that 5.77, but that 13.5 is going onto targets that you could then sleep. So your ability to just destroy encounters at this level is staggering. At 4th level, our damage will remain the same as it was last level, and we are taking our ASI and we're putting our intelligence to 20. Now at 5th level, we are now a 3rd level caster, which means we get our 2nd level spells available to us. Now the spells that you're going to always want prepared from the Artificer spell list at this level are Web and Aid. Aid is going to be a great pinch hit power, pinch heal power. You certainly don't want to be committing to using Aid if you don't have to, but because you can pick up 3 party members, it's a great get out of jail free card. Web is an amazingly useful spell. It hits very hard for a 2nd level spell. It will be effective throughout your career, and it is one of the only instances I can think of in D&D where you are exerting a powerful control spell, not an adjunct effect, but a spell, and in the same turn be able to deal the kind of damage that you're going to be dealing here. 13.5, average damage is now 16.5 at 5th level. So getting 13.5 from the cannon is not just below, it's 3 points out of 16 is significant, but you're still in the neighborhood of average damage. So being able to do that and throw a control spell out in the same turn is great, especially at 5th level. For the Artillerist spells, we get Scorching Ray and Shatter. Now, I'm not a fan of Scorching Ray. I can't really recommend really ever using it. Shatter, if you're wanting to do the damage, this is a circumstance where when evaluating the damage that you're going to get, you always want to subtract what you would get from what you would do by casting your cantrip versus the spell itself. So when we get to later damage spells later on in this test drive, I will have already accounted for that. So don't just cast. If you would like to do damage instead of casting web, I think web is always your best choice, almost always. But there are going to be circumstances where maybe not. Maybe shatter would be the right pick. Shatter's got a reasonably decent area of effect for a second level spell, but you really want to make sure that you're hitting at least 3 targets with it to make it worth it. And even then, you want to be subtracting what you would get from casting the cantrip, which at 5th level, now Firebolt is getting another D10. And there's going to be something else to consider here as well. It's that we get the Arcane Firearm at 5th level from the Artillerist. The Arcane Firearm, you can turn a rod, staff, or wand into a firearm. So a spellcasting focus that you are now turning into a firearm. And it will do an extra D8 of damage for any spell that's doing damage that you cast through it. So here at 5th level, now Firebolt is doing the 2d10 from Firebolt and a d8. That's 15.5 on average, and you've got the help from a familiar. You're hitting above the curve, and you're hitting above the curve again by having a enhanced spellcast focus. When you figure it all out, you are doing about 15.5, even though that's the average. That's pretty much how it comes out when you figure out everything in. Advantage and hitting above the curve twice. You're hitting for about 15.5-ish from the Firebolt. So always measure out what you're going to get extra if you're going to cast Shatter. There may be circumstances where it's really worth it, but you're spending a second level spell slot to get that extra damage, and it better be worth it to you. But you've only got 2 second level spell slots at 5th level. I would save them for web or aid. I would be hard pressed with those 2 choices to really ever cast Shatter. But if you just want to blow stuff up, if that's your thing that you really want to do, then Shatter is obviously a way to go. So I was a little bit off when I said 15.5 with the Firebolt. That's true. You are on average. But you're actually doing 16.275 when you figure in criticals with advantage. So your base damage is now 16.275, which is just below average at 5th level. But then you're doing the cannons, and the cannons are doing 13.5. So you are doing pretty much 13 points over average at 5th level. That's amazingly good damage. That's great damage. That's 80% above average. It's not like the nearly 200% at 3rd level. That was insane. But 80% above average damage is great damage. That being said, there are still going to be characters that will do a little bit more. They may or may not be in your party, but there are character builds out there that could do more, but not by a whole lot at this level. At 6th level, we get tool expertise, so any tool proficiency that you have is now doubled. So with thieves' tools, which you're naturally proficient in as an artificer, you're going to have expertise in that. So now you definitely are a pinch rogue. We also get our infusions now jump from 4 known to 6 known, and from 2 items to 3 items. So we had enhanced defense, we had the enhanced spellcast focus, and now we take repulsion shield. So now we also get, because we get 3 items, I have to make another assumption here. You're 6th level now. I'm going to have to assume that by hook or by crook, you were able to get either a +1 spellcasting focus or a +1 set of armor. I'm also assuming that because you're 6th level, that you've also been able to get to half plate. Not critical for this test drive, but just so you get the feel for it, or of how the character will play. So your AC with repulsion shield and having a set of +1 armor, whether it's from an infusion or from acquiring it, your AC will now, and with a 14 dex, your armor class will now be 21 with the chance to cast shield. And with that last item, we're going to take the spell fueling ring. The spell fueling ring is essentially Pearl of Power. It's nice, though, because if you did happen to have a Pearl of Power and you had a spell fueling ring, you could attune to both items and be able to get, when you take a short rest, be able to recover up to a 3rd level spell slot. So having yet another casting of web available to you is going to be great. Or it could be for Shatter, or it could be for Aid, but you'll have another 2nd level spell casting available to you, and that's very precious to a half caster. Here at level 6, there is no change in damage. You're still doing great damage. And at level 7, we get an amazing ability in Flash of Genius. So you can use your reaction when a character, and it could be you, within 30 feet of you, makes an ability check or a saving throw. You can use your reaction to add your intelligence modifier, which is now +5, to that check or saving throw. The only thing that's bad about Flash of Genius is that you can't do it after, it doesn't say you can do this after the result is known. So they're making the saving throw you have to announce. So I would make this on 1, if it's an iffy saving throw. 2, if it's simply just, I can't afford to let that person or myself fail this check or this saving throw. Now, this ability is amazingly powerful. And if it were tied to your proficiency bonus, I would say it's unbelievably powerful. But of course, it's not tied to your proficiency bonus. It's applied to your intelligence modifier. So you get 5 uses of this a day. That's insane. Now, maybe that if they had done this so that you could use it after the fact, they would have tied it to the proficiency modifier. But it's just weird to me that it just screams as one of those abilities that would be tied to proficiency, but it's your intelligence modifier. So you get 5 uses of Flash of Genius a day. Now, this isn't going to make you into a character that will never fail a saving throw, but it's going to be pretty rough. How many saving throws do you need to make a day? Let's assume you just used them all for you, that you were very selfish with it, and there's nothing wrong with that. How many saving throws a day, including concentration saves, do you think you need to make? I mean, and that you would need to apply Flash of Genius to. So I think that it's safe to say that you are almost never going to fail a saving throw after getting Flash of Genius. An amazing ability. And the ability to save a comrade or assure that they won't fail, essentially. It's fantastic. Just a great and flexible, powerful, unbelievable ability. This is why when I was saying earlier in the video that levels 5 and around level 7, level 5, it begins to really take off. Level 7, it really starts to take off. This is why. Flash of Genius, unbelievable power. Now at 8th level, we get an ASI. We already have our 20 intelligence. So this is where you get to start making fun picks. And this one is a fun pick. I would take Lucky. I don't always like to take the Lucky feat, even though it's a great feat. But I often don't find the room for it or the real need for it. With this character, when you consider Flash of Genius and this, not only will this virtually assure you'll never fail a saving throw, but it will allow you the flexibility to use a bit more of those Flash of Geniuses for other party members If the cannon needs to make a saving throw, it does so assuming that its stat is a 10, which means you're just rolling a d20 and hoping you hit the saving throw. Now, it's got 5 times your level in hit points, so it'll have 15 hit points, and it can be healed with 2d6. It will receive 2d6 of healing via the mending spell, which is why you really have to take the mending spell. But here's the deal. The mending spell is not a spell you can cast in combat. So at this level, if the cannon does go down, it's just down. But that doesn't mean that it's done for. At the end of combat, you can revive it with the mending spell. But it has an 18 AC, so it's going to be reasonably hard to hit. And it has a reasonable amount of hit points. I mean, if you're talking about an 8th level Artificer, that's a cannon with 40 hit points. Now think of it this way. If your cannon just served the purpose of drawing those attacks from the enemy, and if the enemy was having to hit armor class 18 to hit those attacks to do that damage, that means it's probably missing here and there to do it. So even if the cannon should go down, that's not the end of the world. That's actually great for the party. So don't get too wrapped up in the loss of damage that you'll be dealing. Now you just flip it and just say, I just saved the party all that damage. It's an enormous amount of value for a first level spell slot. Unbelievable. Now the other part, if you make the small cannon, it occupies its own space. The value for that is that it occupies its own space. So if you do have the cannon advance into a frontline situation, since it's using the flamethrower cone, that means that's a square the enemy can't get around, or get through, I should say. So it can make things a bit more difficult. Now, granted, moving around the cannon itself is not a trouble because there's no opportunity attack threat. But you could put it in a situation where it's just simply blocking that square. If that was the only square it could get to without incurring an opportunity attack, you could simply put the cannon there. So there's strategic value to making a small cannon. Now, here at 8th level, we've been enjoying a bit of being ahead of the curve all this time with that, starting out with an 18 intelligence and then a 20 intelligence. Now we are at the curve. So our damage takes just a touch, goes a touch back by about 0.75 in damage. So we're doing 15.5 in base damage here at 8th level and still getting the 13.5 from the cannon. So 29. So still really good damage. 70% above average. Okay, 9th level. We are now a 5th level caster, which means we get 3rd level slots. So we have 4 first level slots, 3 second level slots, and 2 3rd level slots. From the Artillerist spell list, we get Fireball and Wind Wall. Wind Wall is okay. There are certain circumstances where Wind Wall could actually be quite useful. If you're getting assaulted with a bunch of ranged attacks, it could actually be a lifesaver. But other than that, I can't really recommend Wind Wall, especially when you've got Fireball available to you. Now, Fireball gets vilified for not having the impact that it did when you got it at 5th level. It's generally looked at as it scales down in its importance by about this level, by 8th or 9th level. But I find that analysis kind of weird because there's not a whole lot of spells that just drop that much damage in area of effect. So it may not have the impact that it certainly isn't going to have the impact that it did at 5th level. But that doesn't mean that it's still not doing great damage, and it will do great damage. So having Fireball is fantastic. This is going to make some real decisions for you as a character here, because you could now switch from being from levels 5 through level 8, being really from levels 1 through level 8, being a controller, because you could certainly look at sleep as a control spell. So levels 1 through 8 is being a controller who does damage to now just being damage with Fireball and reserving your second level slots for things like aid. You could certainly play that way or just kind of mix it and go. You certainly want to use Fireball. The question then becomes, if after casting Fireball, because remember, you have the spell refueling ring, which will recover third level slots. So you will have 2 castings from your spell level, from your caster level, and an extra casting that will be recoverable from the spell refueling ring. So you could be casting Fireball in those average of 3 encounters every encounter now. The question then becomes is what do you do on round 2? So is Web viable on round 2? If it is, and if it will have great effect, and if you need it, then use it. So you hit them hard in round 1 between Fireball and the cannon. That's your turn. Fireball and the cannon in round 1 is fantastic, and then follow it up with Web in round 2. In critical combats, that can be just devastating. But in general, I would not recommend doing that unless it were a really critical thing. I would reserve them for... I would want to make sure I had a spell slot available for aid, and then the other ones for any other new encounters that might show up. Web is always going to be useful. But if it were like a real big encounter, yeah, then use Web. Absolutely. If you are out of spell slots with this character, using your cantrip and the cannon is going to get you through. Now, granted, you have to have spell slots, first level slots available to make cannons. But as I've already discussed, I think that's easy enough to do. But if you're in a situation where the cannon's going down a lot, then you're going to have to calibrate how many spell slots you're going to want to ever use for things like shield. Maybe you just take the hits because you don't want to sacrifice the spell slot to be able to make another cannon. So a lot of complex spellcasting decisions, resource decisions to make, but this allows for really spectacular actions by your character in combat. This is a very vital, powerful character. We also get the Artillerist feature of explosive cannon. This means that the damage done goes up by 1d8, whether through force ballista or from flamethrower. Because it's saying damage, that would not apply to the protector cannon, unfortunately. You can also choose to detonate the cannon. If you do that, any creature within 20 feet of the cannon must make a dexterity saving throw against their spell save DC or take 3d8 force damage. If they save, they take half. So this gives us a great use in 2 scenarios. One, a cannon that may be short on time anyway, like you're in that hour time limit, you're very close to it expiring anyway. So you might as well detonate it in a combat as a combat finisher. Or if the cannon went down in the combat, you could just go ahead and detonate it. Now, I'm not saying always do that, because if it still had plenty of time left on that hour clock, you might not want to do that. But that 3d8 force, that's a pretty good use of a first level spell slot for the cannon detonation. So the problem, of course, being that if the cannon did go down, it probably went down right next to party members. So would you just want to willy-nilly do that? I doubt it. So it may be a scenario where if you were planning to detonate the cannon, you might want to have it move into the middle of the enemy and then detonate it, if this were a planned detonation. But it's the extra d8 of damage that's the really big get here. So average damage, we're still doing our 15.5 base, but now the cannon with just two targets, because of the 3d8 now, we're getting 20.5 from the cannon. I'm sorry, we're getting 20.25 from the cannon. So our average damage is now 35.75. That's just with you and the cannon here at level 9. If you want to throw Fireball into the average here, I would only want to cast Fireball if I could hit 4 targets or more. Maybe 3, but the math I'm going to present to you is based on 4. Now, that is more of a stretch than I normally like to do, but it's really not that big of an assumption that you can hit 4 targets with a Fireball. Fireball's big. The question really becomes, there are plenty of encounters where there may only be 4 targets. They just may be very big targets. And they may or may not all be within the area of effect. So there's going to be some circumstances where you're only going to hit 2 or 3 that you would still want to just do that kind of volume of damage to them. And then there's going to be ones where you're going to hit 7, 8, 9 people. So I'm going to say that you're going to hit 4 when you cast Fireball. Now, subtracting from what you would do from not casting Firebolt that round, that 15.5, if you were to cast 2 Fireballs a day in an adventuring day that hit 4 targets on average for each one, that would raise your average damage per round to 11.28. That would bring your total to 47.03. And if you were able to cast 3 Fireballs in a day, and remember you have the spell Refueling Ring, that would raise your average damage per round for the adventuring day to 52.6 per round. That is over 200% over average damage at this level. It's one thing to do that at level 3. It's another thing to do that at level 9. So after doing all of that, and you've still got 3 webs to use, it's an amazingly effective character. And at 10th level, we get Magic Item Adept. This gives us the ability to attune to 4 magic items. And that's great because that's something that nobody else can do. So that's a fantastic ability. And our infusions jump to 8 known, and we can infuse 4 items. In addition, things like Enhanced Defense or Enhanced Spellcasting Focus each jump up to +2. So now you've got kind of a problem, because if you had +1 armor that you've been wearing that, let's say you found adventuring, you might prefer, and rightfully so, want to have the +2 armor. And similarly, if you had a +1 spellcasting focus that you had found somewhere in adventuring, you would definitely want to prefer to have the +2 from your infusion. So you're going to have to start making some choices there. So now I'm going to assume that you're going to take the enhanced defense and the spellcasting focus, regardless of how this all worked out with your adventuring stuff. This is my assumption for this test drive. So you're getting +2 armor and the +2 spellcasting focus. Then you're going to take replicate magic item, and at 10th level we get those options available to us now for replicate magic item. We're going to take Cloak of Protection. That's of course going to give us +1 to our AC and +1 to all of our saves. So now by fortifying that yet again with saving, of course the AC is plenty, but getting +1 to all your saves is great. But with the redundancies we already have from Flash of Genius and Lucky, what that means is the Flash of Genius will now even become a little bit more flexible to be used for other people. Another synergistic thing we get from Magic Item Adept is that we can craft common and uncommon magic items at a quarter of the time that it takes to craft them otherwise. So here's where I would suggest maybe crafting a Pearl of Power, which is an uncommon magic item. You would then swap out the spell Refueling Ring. It would only take you 2.5, 3 days, 3.5 days, depending on how your DM is looking at the work week, and a quarter of that. So 2.5 to 3.5 days is all it would take to craft a Pearl of Power. So I think that's very, very reasonable. The gold cost is like 200 gold. That's nothing at 10th level. So as a quick review with magic items, we're looking at having +2 armor, +2 spellcasting focus. Neither of those require attunement. You either have the spellcasting or the spell Refueling Ring, which does require attunement, or a Pearl of Power, also requiring attunement. You could have both of those, but I'm not going to recommend that. So you have one of those. So you have one item that you have to be attuned to, and at least 2 of your infused items accounted for. The Cloak of Protection requires an attunement. So that's 2 items attuned, and you can attune to 4. And we're at 3 infused items for sure, possibly 4 if you didn't craft a Pearl of Power. If you did craft the Pearl of Power, that gives you another infused item that you can make and attune to. So you have choices here at 10th level of things like Helm of Telepathy, Winged Boots. Now, these are all uncommon items, so they're not impossible to just go and get and acquire, but they're relatively powerful. I mean, Winged Boots is very, very powerful. So if your DM just is not dropping it, or it's not showing up as something that you can acquire otherwise, and you've been wanting them, now's the time. But those would be the 2 big ones. Slipper of Spider Climb is another available option. I would prefer Winged Boots over Slippers of Spider Climb, but Slippers of Spider Climb are great. But if I were making them and I just had the outright choice, I'd take Winged Boots, but Helm of Telepathy is awfully good. But what you do with that one doesn't really matter for the purposes of this test drive. But I'm just trying to illustrate now just how powerful this is, because we're just talking about stuff that is almost gimmies to find in the game and what you can do. And then if you add in, of course, the fact that you're going to find cool stuff, because we're playing Dungeons and Dragons, you're going to find some cool stuff by the time you're 10th level, you'll have that as well. So 4 attunement slots is not going to solve all of your attunement problems in some cases, but it's going to allow you to have a choice of picking something like a winged. Let's say you had 3 that were accounted for that were must-haves. Having like something like Winged Boots be an attunement choice is great. The other option here is Helm of Awareness, and Helm of Awareness may actually be the big pick to take over Helm of Telepathy or Winged Boots, depending on how things worked out for you. If you're finding that you really wish you'd taken Alert in your campaign, now is a time that you could take Helm of Awareness, which will effectively function like Alert. Our average damage per round now, because we're now back ahead of the curve because we've got a +2 spellcasting focus, we are at 36.52 from your firebolt damage, cannon damage, and then when you figure in fireball damage, you're at 53.6 total per round. So at 11th level, you now are a 6th level caster, so you now have a third level spell slot, which means yet another fireball. We also get just another mind-blowing ability here. You get Spell Storing Item. With Spell Storing Item, you pick a weapon or a spellcasting focus, and you cast a spell into it. 1st or 2nd level spell is the maximum. And whoever is holding that can cast that spell as if you had cast it. But they are the ones that would have the concentration baggage for the spell. So if you were to put Web, which is what I would recommend, into the spell storing item, whoever then casts it is enjoying your ability, but they're supplying the concentration. So giving this to someone who doesn't otherwise employ concentration, like a fighter or a rogue, someone like that, or even a caster that's an evoker that doesn't use concentration spells very much, it opens up a resource option. Now, you could use it for yourself, but having that resource option of somebody else supplying the concentration is great. This spell can be cast up to double your intelligence modifier in uses. So 10. You get 10 uses out of that before the spell is gone. Unbelievable ability. And of course, you just can keep refilling it. So having 10 webs, or if you wanted to use aid, and that's not concentration, if you could make an aid spell storing item, and you're just always being able to pick up 3 party members who have fallen. Either way, web or aid, those are clearly the 2 that you want to take. It's unbelievably potent. Our damage now at 11th level, because our firebolt has now jumped to 3d10, is 22.05 base, 20.25 from the cannons, for a total of 42.3 base. That's not counting fireballs, and you've got 3 plus either a spell refueling ring or a pearl of power. So you've got 4 fireballs that you could cast in a day. I'm going to quote the damage now for if you cast 3, because actually casting 4 in a day is not all that reliable. If you did cast the 3 fireballs, you would be at 59.18 in damage per round, which is well over 100% over average at level 11. So this character has just been enjoying, from level 3, has been doing ridiculous damage. It took a slight dip down to 80% for like a level, and then has been at 100% above average or higher ever since. Unbelievable damage. But if you did cast the 4th fireball just out of the sake of completion, you would be at over 64 points of damage per round. Level 12, we get the ASI. Now here, it's kind of dealer's choice. You could go with alert. I would go with alert, or maybe go with con. But at level 14, we're going to have something that's going to potentially shore that up, and it's a good choice to shore that up. But you just have to get to level 14. And campaigns often end around level 14. So if you were worried about your con, you may as well do it now. But alert would be a very strong choice. Another great choice is your wisdom, which is kind of been the odd man out. You've at least got a 14 dex. You've only had 12 wisdom. Con, wisdom are strong choices here, but alert would be also obviously a great choice. So at level 13, we are now a 7th level caster, which means we get a 4th level spell, 4th level spell slot. From the artillerist spells, we get Wall of Fire and Ice Storm. So yet another great offensive choice. Wall of Fire, I love wall spells. Wall of Fire doesn't really do the trick. So I would be inclined to go ahead and use Ice Storm. I would say I would go with the fireballs. They do more damage than Ice Storm, but Ice Storm has the effect of not hitting fire damage. It does a little bit less. I'm not going to figure it into the damage calculations here. They won't change from what we've already got. Obviously, if you did cast Ice Storm after a fireball, that would go up, but Ice Storm it's fine. I wouldn't use my 4th level spell slot on it, though. Your best prep choice is Arcane Eye. And the effects that you can get out of Arcane Eye in terms of the information you can gather through Arcane Eye is well worth the preparation and the spell slot. Now at level 14, and just addressing damage because I haven't addressed it in levels 12 and 13, what we had at level 11, that's our damage. Unless, of course, you're adding in casting of a ice storm or something like that. I'm not going to count those into the calculations because I just don't think that it's reliable that you're always going to be doing that. But so that damage is just insane damage. We're going only up to level 15, so there's not going to be another pivot point for damage to increase. But here at level 14, we get magic item Savant. So now you can attune to 5. You also ignore any restrictions for magic items. So race, class, spell, whatever, you ignore those. You can use those magic items. So you're at the level where it's not at all ridiculous to find major magic items. So you are now always going to be a contender for any of the goody magic items, and you should make a point of wanting to grab them. It may make more sense for a character like you to have them than a character that they would normally be assigned to. Not always, of course, but you should be, and be mindful, of course, that you're already a very powerful character. But the fact that you can have a rightful claim to any of those, that's nice. You also get 5 infused items now and 10 known. So you have things like Ring of Protection that you could add in. And you could also go Amulet of Health. Now, I would say Amulet of Health, if you didn't raise your con at level 12, that's the pick. Amulet of Health will bring your con to 19. That's going to be an immediate jump of 28 hit points to your character, as well as +2 to your con saving throws. Not that you really have been worried about that, but an extra +2 to your con saving throws doesn't hurt. And moving forward, of course, getting an extra 2 hit points per level. It's just a nice grab at this level. Probably, I would say, invariably more powerful than the +1 Ring of Protection by a bit. And so at 15th level, we are now an 8th level caster, and we get a second 4th level spell slot. We also now get from the Artillerist our final thing, which is Fortified Position, which grants you half cover as long as you are within 10 feet of a cannon. You and any of your allies get half cover as long as you are within 10 feet of a cannon. Fantastic ability. What's even more interesting now, of course, is now you can have 2 cannons. So I was lying a bit when I said you're not going to be having the option to do more damage. If you were to add another flamethrower, obviously, and you could hit the same targets, you would be doing 40 points of damage around from the cannons alone. But I think it is likely that I would probably want to take, if I had 2 cannons out at once, I would want to take one as a protector and one as the flamethrower. That extra 20 points of damage around is going to be insane. And you could, this is the point, is that you can decide when you make the cannons. You're not married to the cannons. So you can pick as you go. I just think you're going to often want that protector as an option because it's generating those hit points every round. It's like you now are kind of like a Twilight cleric as well. You wouldn't want to do that earlier necessarily because the offense is too valuable. At this point, the offense, you've already got the offense now. You could go with more offense, and if the situation calls for it, you should. That's another 20 points of damage to already insane damage. Just to quote that out, if you were to cast 4 fireballs in the day and you have 2 cannons, you would be doing over 84 points of damage around. So insane. But if you just kept it at the 64 that you were at earlier, that other cannon is going to be generating temporary hit points round after round after round and half cover. So I think that that's just probably the stronger pick at this level, but the damage it can't be denied. It's certainly great. So amazing damage throughout your career from level 3 up, and at levels 1 and 2, you got sleep. Well, that's all I've got. If you enjoyed the video, please like, please share, please subscribe. If you're interested in supporting the channel, it is much needed and would be greatly appreciated. Please do check out the Patreon. And if you're stuck and you don't know where to go, you can always search for a secret door. Until next time, I cast bless on all of you.